Am I the asshole for bringing my own food to my mother-in-law's house after years of her guilt-tripping me about her cooking? Because I have been sitting with it for weeks, and I honestly don't know if I handled any of this well. I feel the need to get this off my chest. Okay, so I need to get this off my chest. I am of Chinese descent. There is an Indian in my mother-in-law. In the midst of all of this, my husband is the son who is caught in the middle. And eating, in some mysterious way, became the battlefield where the tension that had been building for 3 years finally detonated. Permit me to take a step back. My mother-in-law was the first person I had met, and I was so anxious that I over-prepared myself. Over the course of 2 days, I prepared a traditional Chinese spread, which is authentic home cooking rather than takeaway. Fish that has been steamed with ginger and scallion, pork belly that has been braised, a vegetable stir-fry, and soup. Recipes from my mother. Being genuinely proud of myself, I set everything on their table after carrying it all over in containers and arranging it in the appropriate manner. The woman who is my mother-in-law looked at the table, then looked at me, and then she remarked, "I don't like Chinese food." Yes, that was it. No appreciation, no thank you for making this, no explanation, no, "Oh, it smells nice, I'll try a little," nothing of significance. After making that unremarkable remarks, she proceeded to enter the kitchen in order to prepare some tea for herself. There I was, standing next to the containers of food I had brought with me, and I had no idea where to look. At the other end of the room, my husband was acting as if he was checking his phone. After quietly rising to his feet, his father gave himself a tiny taste of the food and remarked that it was delicious, but the harm had already been done. There was a time when I thought, well, maybe she's just being blunt. Perhaps this is just the way that she is. It is now in my file. Let it go, I told myself, and I did. At that point, I made my first error. A fairly similar pattern emerged in the trips that were made to their home over the course of the subsequent couple of years. She was my mother-in-law's cook. She was a very cook. When we talk about a meal, we're talking about many courses, heavy seasoning, and the kind of meal that strikes you with the smell while you're still standing outside the front door. I am aware that a great number of people adore that. It is my understanding that in her culture, cuisine of that kind signifies love and dedication, because I sincerely respect that. On the other hand, my stomach does not like food that is extremely strongly spiced. Just so you know, I'm not trying to be theatrical. On multiple occasions, I've had to gently remove myself from the table because I was feeling unwell. I've learned to eat before I eat so that I can stealthily consume little portions without drawing attention to myself. With a smile on my face, I've eaten meals that caused my eyes to water. I made an effort. Indeed, I did it. To tell you the truth, she was always aware of the fact that I did not finish my dish. At all times, she would observe me from the other side of the table in a manner that gave me the impression that I was being evaluated. "So, you don't like my cooking?" she would ask, expressing her tone in this particular manner. And then the question would come. I deflected the first several times I was asked. "I'm just not that hungry. I had a big lunch. I'm still eating. I'm just slow." She had allowed it to fall, yet, the expression on her face made it very plain that she was not content. When my husband became aware of the stress, he would look at me with a sympathetic expression and then return to whatever he was doing at the time. He was not going to intervene. I was aware of the fact that she was his mother, but I also understood. Afterward, she proceeded to go even further. From "you don't like my cooking," to "everyone else loves my cooking, why don't you?" And finally to "I cook for you every time you come here." The conversation progressed from one point to the next. On this, I spend a lot of time. You don't even bother to consume it. That change occurred at such a gradual pace that I almost failed to notice it. On the other hand, I gradually came to the realization that what began as her experiencing hurt had evolved into something that she utilized as a tool. During each and every visit, there was a constant undercurrent of, "You owe me. This is a debt that you owe to me. Unless you eat it, you are showing a lack of respect." It was after a particularly awful supper that I had a conversation with my husband about it. When we were in the car on our way home, I remained silent for a considerable amount of time, and he eventually inquired as to what was wrong. I said, "Every single time we go there, your mother makes me feel like a complete and utter failure. The issue is with the food. There is no end to it." It was a sigh. It's not true that she does. Just like that, she demonstrates that she cares. She provides sustenance to individuals. I am aware of that. She continues to accuse me of being guilty. I feel as though I am failing some kind of test every time I don't finish what I'm eating. He stated that she does it to him as well. Throughout my entire youth, she did that. In the end, you learn to simply eat. I told her, I can't just eat it as is. I become ill as a result of it. You are aware of this fact. Indeed, he did not provide a response to that. Using the radio, he turned it on. As I sat there in the passenger seat, I had the impression that I was completely by myself. It was probably at that point that I ought to have exerted more effort in order for us to genuinely deal with it jointly. In its place, I became silent. I continued to appear at dinners. I continued to jostle the food about on my plate. In addition, The animosity began to accumulate in a location that I was unable to quite access. To be fair, I want to say this. I have no doubt that my mother-in-law adores her son. I am aware that she sincerely shows her affection through the act of preparing food. It is not easy to relocate to a new nation and have your son marry someone who is not from your culture. I am aware of this truth. At least 100 times, I have attempted to comprehend her point of view. The thing that kept coming back to me, however, was that she disregarded my food before she had even had the opportunity to try it. During that very first encounter, she did not even take a single mouthful of the lunch that I had prepared using my mother's recipes. It was food that exemplified my family and my history. And then, for many years after that, if I brought something to share with her, she would either utterly disregard it or find a reason not to try it. In the meantime, I was sitting at her table, my stomach was churning, and I was eating food that made me feel physically ill in a quiet manner because I didn't want to be impolite toward her. In no way was it equal. That was something that I couldn't stop thinking about. It was actually a relatively minor occurrence that caused me to lose my cool. I had brought over a dish that I prepare quite frequently. It is one of my dishes that is truly fantastic, and it is something that I am confident in. As I handed the container to her, I smiled and added, "I hope you enjoy it. Your thoughts would be very much appreciated." A quick glance was given to the container. Not opened it at all. Doesn't smell like it. I simply placed it on the counter and stated, "I'm not having any hunger. A meal has already been consumed by me. Would you mind taking a small bite?" At the same time, I maintained a light tone in my speech. Simply said, "I do not enjoy eating meals like this. It is not for me to do." Something moved in my chest at that moment. "You haven't even opened it." She gave a shrug, when in fact, he shrugged. "It's just not what I'm used to." I remained there for a brief moment. I then proceeded to say, "You've never tried it before I could do anything to stop myself. How are you able to tell that you do not like it?" She tensed up more. I was able to observe it. "I know what I like. For the past 3 years, you have been trying to make me feel guilty about not eating your meal. It has been 3 years. You are not going to even attempt to sample a single bite of mine." It became quite quiet in the kitchen. The face of my mother-in-law turned bright red. She uttered a few words, then sealed them back up again. The man who would later become my husband's father entered the room from the other room, took a quick glance at us, and then discreetly left. I added, "I'm not trying to start a fight," and my voice was shaking more than I intended it to be. I was trying to be respectful. To put it simply, I want to comprehend. What makes it one of a kind? Why is it that you are required to consume anything that you set in front of me, but you are not required to touch anything that I've prepared? She concluded by saying, "You should stick to your own kind of food." Just now, that sentence made its way into the group. She probably did not intend for it to sound the way that it did. Or it's possible that she did. With all honesty, I am not aware. On the other hand, it seemed as though the entire topic that we had been avoiding for the past 3 years suddenly materialized in front of us. Neither did I yell. I went and grabbed my bag. After saying, "Okay," I proceeded to head to the living room in order to locate my husband. Soon after, he was able to determine. He addressed me by looking at my face and asking, "What happened?" I sighed and replied, "I have to go home. Right now." As we were driving, I shared everything with him. To the very letter. As soon as I reached the point when she suggested that I should stick to the meal that I am most comfortable with, he became extremely still. That is what she stated. It is true. Not a single word came out of his mouth for the remainder of the trip. After we had entered the building, he called her. At that moment, I sat down on the couch and listened to his portion of the talk. "You, Mom, what was it that you said to her?" Pause for a moment. "No, I'm going to ask you to be more precise about what you stated." A longer pause is required. It caused his jaw to stiffen. "This is not the point at all. You have been engaging in this behavior for a number of years, and it is not acceptable. When she doesn't finish her dish, she won't keep coming over merely to feel bad about herself. She won't do that." Even from the opposite side of the room, I was able to hear his mother's voice growing louder as it was transmitted via the phone. I heard the phrases "overreacting" and "just food" as well as "you're taking her side." He stated, "It is not about finding a side, it's about showing the utmost respect." Some other item was said by her. He was attentive. After then, he hung up the phone and remarked, "I'm not going to discuss this any further tonight," in a very calm manner. He joined me on the couch and sat down next to me. We remained silent for a short period of time before any of us spoke. At long last, he expressed his regret. "I should have handled this a long time ago." "Yes," I responded, "you should have." Despite the fact that it was not courteous of me, it was honest. The repercussions continued for a few weeks. He received a phone call from his mother. It appears that his father told her that she had exerted too much effort. In addition, she did not take that well at all. My husband received a number of texts in which she expressed her dissatisfaction with the fact that she had been made to feel like a villain in her own home, that her food was being insulted, and that she had sacrificed a great deal in order to prepare for everyone. But no one acknowledged her efforts. It was one night when he read them to me. Honestly, I was at a loss for words. There were parts of what she said that made me feel genuinely sorry. He was not a monstrous being. She was a lady who had feelings of rejection, and was unable to find a method to deal with them in a manner that did not involve control. But that did not make it acceptable to engage in guilt tripping for 3 years. Moreover, it did not make the phrase stick to your own kind of food acceptable. Each of those two possibilities is a possibility. That was the point at which his father became more interested. My husband received a direct phone call from him, and he told him, "Your mother went too far. On the other hand, she is not going to say that on her own. In this situation, you need to determine the boundaries that you are truly drawing." Immediately following that call, my spouse came to me looking fatigued. That was the question that he posed to me. What do you actually want? To put it more tangible, what must take place in order for something to be considered okay? It was something that I pondered for a moment. I want the food thing to stop, I indicated to myself. I do not wish to be subjected to intimidation at the table anymore. In addition, I would like to have some acknowledgement that what she said was incorrect. He stated that she would not be directly apologizing for her actions. You know that, right? I am aware of. Therefore, what is the version of acknowledgement that you find to be most effective? In all honesty, that was a very helpful question. In the evening, we engaged in a lengthy conversation. We had not had a talk that was as open and honest as this one in quite some time. In a completely different way, the next visit was tense than the previous one. Not a single person argued. When it came to eating, nobody mentioned anything at all. She did not make any remarks when I served myself a tiny bit of the food that my mother-in-law had prepared and when she had put everything on the table. My eating was not seen by her. She had a conversation with her son about something completely different. I brought a single dish. It is now sitting on the table. Despite the fact that she did not touch it, she did not make a face about it either. All she did was let it remain there. Warmth was not present. There was no resolution to it. To put it another way, it was more like a truce, with both sides withdrawing from the front line since the cost of combat had reached an unacceptable level. And for the first time in years, I was able to sit at that table and eat my food without feeling ill to my stomach due to feelings of guilt or pressure. While it may have seemed like it should have been a triumphant experience, in reality, it was not. It had a calm atmosphere, as if something had already happened. And ever since then, I've been considering it, concerning whether or not I handled the confrontation appropriately. Whether or not putting pressure on her to eat that day was the most intelligent thing to do, or whether it was simply the most satisfying thing to do at the time. With regard to whether or if my husband and I have actually improved, or whether we are simply being more cautious with each other. Since then, the guilt tripping has ceased. The therapy of silence is gradually becoming the norm. Everything works as it should. It's not a trivial matter. On the other hand, I can't help but think of that first day, when I was standing next to my mother's recipes while she went off to make her own tea, and how much effort I expended over the subsequent 3 years in an attempt to be courteous and obliging without making it a problem. Also, how none of that was successful. There was only one thing that genuinely brought about any change, and that was the decision to stop absorbing it. Regarding that, I do not have a sense of victory. Simply put, I am feeling exhausted. And I suppose the reason I'm publishing this is because I want to know if I made a mistake by pushing back in the manner that I did. For the reason that there are days when I feel as though I am finally standing up for myself, and there are other days when I feel as though I have just learned how to fight in the same way that she started. The next story. So, I've been quietly attending therapy for a while now, and it's really been helping me. But there's this one family member, my aunt, who constantly dismisses therapy as a crutch for the spiritually weak. Yet, when she starts feeling spiritually dry, she ends up unknowingly quoting my therapist's advice as if it's divine revelation. The best part? She still refuses to admit that therapy could be helpful, all while she's happily quoting my therapist to everyone like it's her own wisdom. It was a typical Sunday family lunch, the kind where everyone gathers around a big table and talks over plates of food. Aunt Carolyn had always been the one to lead the conversation, offering unsolicited advice and prayers whenever someone was struggling. But that day, something in her tone was different. She wasn't her usual self-assured, preacher-like figure. She sat there, stirring her tea, her eyes distant. "I've been feeling spiritually dry lately," she said, her voice soft. "I don't know what it is, it's like, I've been praying, but I still feel empty." I froze for a moment. I didn't know what to say. She was the last person I expected to hear something like that from. Aunt Carolyn, who had always talked about how prayer was the solution to everything, was suddenly admitting that it wasn't working for her. It was almost like she was asking for help, but still rejecting the very thing that could help her, therapy. I remembered something my therapist had told me months ago. Sometimes we mistake emotional exhaustion for a spiritual crisis. They feel the same, but they need different care. I hesitated for a second. Should I say something? Should I tell her that maybe her spiritual dry spell was just her mental health catching up with her? Against everything I'd been taught to believe, I decided to speak up. Sometimes, we mistake emotional exhaustion for a spiritual crisis. They feel the same, but they need different care, I said. Her face lit up a little, and she asked me to repeat it. I could tell she was hanging on to my every word. That sounds like something out of one of those little devotional books, doesn't it? She said, smiling. Maybe you can send me that quote. I agreed, promising to send it later. And as I sat there, I felt a small spark of satisfaction. She had just opened herself up to therapy advice, and she didn't even know it. It was a quiet victory, but it was a victory nonetheless. The next week, the texts started coming. Can you send me that quote again? Aunt Carolyn asked, almost urgently. That was really helpful. At first, I wasn't sure if I should indulge her, but I did. I sent her the quote from my therapist, the one she had loved so much. She thanked me profusely, telling me that she really needed that. And then it happened again. A few days later, another text. I've been feeling down again. Do you have any more little gems like that? I didn't know how to feel. Part of me wanted to stop. I wanted to tell her to look into therapy herself. But then I realized she would never accept it. So, instead, I kept sending her quotes, letting her believe that they were divine wisdom. I'd send a little piece of advice from my therapist, and Aunt Carolyn would respond with, thank you, this is just what I needed. Every time I sent a quote, I felt a mix of satisfaction and guilt. She was so clueless, so certain that this was spiritual advice when it was actually just therapy. And every time I saw that text pop up on my phone, asking for more little gems, I couldn't help but feel like I was winning some sort of quiet battle. But at what cost? It was a family gathering, and Aunt Carolyn was at it again. This time, she was quoting my therapist's advice like it was scripture. She was sitting at the head of the table, practically glowing as she shared her new wisdom. Sometimes emotional exhaustion feels like a spiritual crisis, she said, with a proud smile. It's a sign that we need to care for ourselves in different ways. She paused dramatically, looking around the table. I've been learning so much lately, this has really helped me. The family looked at her like she was some sort of prophet. My mom, my cousins, everyone was nodding and smiling, as if Aunt Carolyn had just discovered the secret to life. They were praising her for finding clarity, for being so spiritually strong, for sharing this wisdom. And I just stood there, frozen. The worst part? She didn't know. She had no idea that this wisdom was something I had been getting from therapy. She was quoting my therapist's words, and everyone around her thought it was her divine insight. The irony of it all hit me like a punch to the gut. Aunt Carolyn turned to me, her eyes sparkling with excitement. What do you think, my name? Isn't that a beautiful way to look at it? I wanted to scream. I wanted to tell her the truth, but I didn't. I just smiled, tight-lipped, and nodded. It is. It really is. She looked so pleased with herself, and I couldn't help but feel a sinking feeling in my stomach. This isn't just funny anymore. This is tragic. I wasn't just letting her take credit for something she didn't understand. I was letting her steal my healing, my hard work, and claim it as her own. It felt like I was betraying myself. That night, after the family dinner, I went to my room and sat on the edge of my bed, phone in hand. Aunt Carolyn's text was still there, waiting for me. Do you have any more little gems for me? I've really been feeling the need for more wisdom. I could feel my fingers trembling as I opened my messages. Part of me wanted to just ignore it, tell her to stop asking for my therapist's words, but instead, I found myself typing out another quote, just like before. Sometimes we mistake emotional exhaustion for a spiritual crisis. I hit send. And then I sat there, phone in hand, the weight of the situation crashing down on me. What have I become? I've been playing this game with her for weeks, feeding her these little pieces of wisdom, letting her believe they were something divine. But now? It didn't feel like a victory anymore. It felt hollow. I thought about the family dinner, her shining moment as the spiritual sage, quoting my therapist's words like they were hers. Everyone was praising her, and she was basking in the attention. But none of them knew the truth. They didn't know that all this time, I had been quietly feeding her words that weren't even hers. I picked up my phone again, ready to tell her the truth, but I didn't. Instead, I deleted the message. Maybe some victories aren't worth it. The next day, I saw Aunt Carolyn again.